I hope that those watching this part before the rest do so, as everything regarding part 4 will contextualize everything wrong with the episodes in the prior parts to an even greater extent than what I've just outlined, meaning this should be by far the longest section of my Wednesday analysis. Starting part 4, we interject a funeral concession for Mayor Walker with all the major players in attendance, especially of note his son and presumably mother as well. As for how this tragedy will affect Lucas's feelings towards Outcast will, once again, never be redressed further, and he's quickly hushed out of camera to impart Wednesday's further pinning down who the killer or killers are. She spots a mysterious man in a top hat spying on her, and she gives chase, only to find that the person who was watching her was none other than Uncle Fester himself. Now, there's a lot of questions that most normal audiences wouldn't immediately ask that I would when including such an iconic facsimile of the Addams family, and those answers will be addressed once the episode starts proper. Questions like, where the fuck was Uncle Fester during the family gathering episode? Why did he give Wednesday the impression that he was some creep spying on her? And why now, of all times, for him to show up? I have an aching impression that the meta reasons for including Uncle Fester was likely desperation from the show writers to bring back audiences by strumming on their nostalgia strings via Uncle Fester after the former episodes proved how little the Addams family were relevant to this Addams Family show. Although, given that the show somehow was a viewership powerhouse in spite of its quality, also makes me think this inclusion wasn't necessary in the first place. But I also know that there's another writing reason to have Uncle Fester here in the near finisher of the episode, so rest assured, all contrivances for him to be here now will be addressed. So, in starts the episode proper. Wednesday asks how long Uncle Fester has been in town, in which he answers only just today did he show up. Supposedly, he was made aware of what's been circling Wednesday around Jericho and figured he'd show up, while also having a means to lay low concerning some job he did in Boston. Because of Eugene's absence, and that Eugene was the only student who took part in beekeeping, his little beehive is a convenient place for Fester to shack up in. I didn't bring this up earlier when relevant, but why would Weems finance an extracurricular activity that only one student was using as opposed to consolidating it for activities that more students would use? Or, if beekeeping is such a necessary part of education, why not make it a non-volunteer activity? It should also be noted that this is also the place where Wednesday kept her murder collage back in episode 4 in since his absence, and that for the better part of nearly 2 weeks, Weems or none of the other faculty have bothered to lock it up or close it to public access until further notice, given their only student using it is in a coma for an indeterminate amount of time. While in Eugene's shed, Uncle Fester asks if Wednesday even knows what the monster she's been looking for even is, to which Wednesday says she hasn't been able to, and gives Uncle Xavier's sketch of it. And then, in comes Uncle Fester, who, no shit, literally exposits a shit ton of info that would dramatically help Wednesday in this case. First, he establishes that this monster is a Hyde, as per the analogy with Jekyll and Hyde, and gives Wednesday an anecdotal experience of one. Secondly, that any information on this Hyde was in Nathaniel Faulkner's diary, as the records of this monster are presumably absent from Nevermore books. And that Nathaniel Faulkner was the founder of Nevermore, which will contradict what Morticia said to Wednesday about Goody being the founder of the Nightshades, as Nathaniel Faulkner's diary is kept there, meaning that Nathaniel either was also a founder of the Nightshades, or at the very least knew of their existence. Now, with all of this information being spoon-fed to Wednesday by a character who up to this point has had no involvement in the story means that Uncle Fester's only reason to exist here is to facilitate a writing shortcut while also getting that quick nostalgia buck in turn. And what a fucking cop-out that is, now isn't it? Interesting too that at no point does Morticia make this relevant to Wednesday given what she told them about what she's been experiencing when she had this conversation in the fucking Nightshade library where said diary is, that Wednesday herself didn't figure out that Nathaniel Faulkner was the founder if she supposedly poured through all of Nevermore's books for info about the monster, and that Faulkner, this diary, and its significance is a literal invention of this episode going forward. But most baffling of all is that Wednesday once again proves how she keeps rolling a nat 0 in perception in spite of how desperate the writers want us to believe how perceptive and smart she is. If, for now, the third time another character has to lead her along the way, on top of getting visions that further shortcut her supposed intuition. Now, to completely change gears on another tangent, and this may come off as anti-Semitic, especially given the circumstances of the world stage, but why did they make Uncle Fester Jewish? Or should I say, why did they make him sound Jewish? He literally says, "Oy vey," during his exposition dump, and has an extremely whiny up-pitch in voice in comparison to Christopher Lloyd's interpretation of him. Assuming that this Uncle Fester is the real Uncle Fester and not the person who is only pretending to be him like in the 1991 movie, shouldn't Uncle Fester inherit more of the Spanish-Mexican leanings that this show put more emphasis towards? If he's supposed to be Gomez Addams' brother, and more specifically, Louise Guzman's Gomez Addams' brother, it beggars belief that Uncle Fester acts nothing like him in turn. Ultimately, this is just subjective and not anything objectively wrong, it's just an odd choice is all. For completely arbitrary reasons, Wednesday tells Fester that they'll check out the library at night for the book, as opposed to any other time of the day, as her going into it wouldn't be a violation on her no off-campus policy. Interesting that I say that when Wednesday already did, given the funeral concession, but maybe Weems also gave a pass to that as well? Anyhow, Wednesday sulks in her room alone with the monologue as per usual until Enid awkwardly slips in, grabbing something she forgot in this room several times over. While it's apparent that Enid wants to go back to her dorm in spite of Wednesday, they still hash out their usual quips at each other and the situation continues to go unresolved, which I'm actually glad they didn't, because I sincerely thought that this show would upend that drama literally in the next episode and only 10 minutes in said episode 2. Anyhow, Wednesday goes into the Nightshade Library at night, as per her plan, with no Uncle Fester in sight. Yeah, maybe you should have told him where and how to get in, you dumb bitch, but maybe Fester also knew that given his encyclopedic knowledge on everything involving your murder mystery, conveniently enough. In springs Xavier, who's doing his Nightshade things, and confronts Wednesday about who she decides to trust.
You know what your problem is?
I would love to hear your piercing insight.
You don't know who your real friends are. I've been on your side since day one. I literally saved your life. I believed your theories when nobody else did. Like, what do I get in return? Just nothing but suspicion and lies.
Fine. You want honesty? Here it is.
And while it is great that Xavier lays this all out, what doesn't match up for me is why he puts up with her in spite of how much shit she gives him throughout. And oh boy, will him sticking up with Wednesday in spite of it all will turn real bad for him, won't it? Wednesday gives him her honest thoughts about him, how convenient it was for him to show up just as the monster disappeared, his obsession with the drawings, as well as claiming that he hurt Eugene after having drawn that cave. Now, of course, Wednesday is a fucking dumbass for making all these conclusions as, 1, the only reason Xavier shows up when convenient is for the sake of the fucking plot. 2, Xavier didn't know, nor care to know where you were when you were out seeking Eugene in episode 4. 3, that Sheriff Galpin already told you that the DNA of the chipped fang and rag didn't match. And 4, Wednesday, do you think it's odd that the monster only just took a single swipe at Tyler instead of ripping him to shreds like the monster has been proven to do every other time? But we don't get to prod Wednesday on that, as Xavier simply gives her a hypothetical that if he was, why hasn't he tried to kill her up to this point? She concludes that he likes her and he gives this fucking zinger that would have Wednesday spinning circles for just how humbled she got right here.
Because for some reason I cannot fathom or indulge you seem to like me.
What's to like?
Apparently, Fester was here to witness all this, and I suppose didn't want to intrude on the relationship between the two. More hilarious antics between Fester and Thing ensue before the main entree of this plot continues. Thing helps Wednesday crack the safe and retrieve the diary, getting the three to convene back at Ophelia Hall. Again, I'm not in the least bit surprised that Fester is just able to waltz in here given how lax the security at Nevermore is, begging the question further as to how a school lockdown could even be remotely enforced. But regardless, Wednesday pours through the diary and finds that this hide can be compelled by a master if it's able to liberate it from its outburst, caused by traumatic events, hypnosis, or chemical inducement. Keep these words in note, as from just this alone will Wednesday use it to pin a certain therapist as the supposed master. But this now establishes that it takes two to tango, and two to terrorize a town for teens to untangle a trail of troublesome and trite transcripts. Back at Xavier's shed, he's walking up to it, supposedly having a call with someone before he gets cut off by Wednesday, wondering who it was. Of course he doesn't tell, as it's none of her business, as he storms off to his shed, which is yet again not locked. I wonder if this will fare badly for him, I wonder. As Xavier moves out with bike in tow, Wednesday and Fester were spying on him with the intention of seeing where he's heading out to. Supposedly Wednesday got a tracker on him, and the means to follow him with one of Fester's more whimsical vehicles. Now, I'm sure you're probably asking yourselves how Wednesday will skirt Weems' off-campus rule yet again, given the circumstances of her doing this, but also remember that Xavier is also somehow able to get into town, in spite of the school being on lockdown during these events. This will get addressed somewhat, if clunkily. As Fester and Wednesday make haste, they find where Xavier stopped at, which was apparently at the edge of the lake, having a discussion with Kimbot about him having a dream in which she died. This will be important for what will happen at the end of this episode, and the further plot poison being currently injected in both Kimbot and Xavier to facilitate this. But regardless, that does spur Wednesday's suspicions further. Now, given that we only get a brief look at the tracker, I'm going to assume that the likely place where Xavier and Kimbot meet would be here, a fair distance away from what would be the campus grounds. Now, given this meeting is brief, maybe you could reason that Weems wouldn't have gotten wise to both of them leaving, but that will be damaged considering what happens next. Wednesday storms in Weems' office to discuss with her on the matter concerning Kimbot, only to find Kimbot is already present in said office, a bit perturbed as to the judge's call regarding the progress in her therapy sessions. Through this, Wednesday suggests hypnotherapy as a way to improve the matters of her therapy progress, as well as pin Kimbot as suspect given what Faulkner's diary proposed. Kimbot obliges, opting for their next session to do just that. After that, Weems brings back the matter of what Wednesday barged in on, but Wednesday says it could be saved for later. And had Wednesday brought it up meant she would have gotten herself fucking expelled had not Kimbot stunlocked her into doing so. Because how else would Wednesday know Kimbot was up to no good unless she did walk out of school grounds? So, weather vane back at the, Wednesday surmises what the audience should already believe to Fester, as though we are about as thick-headed as he is. Tyler butts in and is introduced to Fester, and with it comes more of that humor that this show loves to impart, especially on Fester. On top of this, Tyler also spots the diary she's pouring through, getting a series of mixed emotions from him as great subtext regarding what I know. Now, you're once again asking how and why Wednesday is off of campus yet again unpunished, and the show basically says, fuck it. Shit. Even Gulpin storms in wondering why Wednesday is with Tyler as per his instructions, and Tyler has to defend her, having him walk off wondering why he even bothers, as though aping the sentiment this show belies in regards to narrative continuity. In spite of the deceitfulness, Tyler still wants to plan that date for Wednesday and that she has an obligation to afterwards. Wednesday, no shit, literally says this while she herself is off campus right now as a justification not to. Only for Tyler to suggest that he'll go to her and have it at Crackstone Crypt around 9 p.m. Which, remember folks, Crackstone Crypt is not only on an island, but still off of campus grounds if we're made to believe you have to swim to get to it. But when it comes to shitty writing at the tail end, details like that are just inconvenient to what you want to establish. So, just before Wednesday heads out on her date, she's having some reservations about Enid being absent from her dorm while Thing seems to confront her on the matter. Wednesday copes about the horror ordeal before setting off to Crackstone Crypt. And how? Again, the show doesn't entail in spite of prior establishing a reason to before. Tyler has the whole set decorated and made macabre in a way only Wednesday can find horrifying. a picnic venue where they watch glitzy girl flicks, and seeing Wednesday's reaction is quite humorous given what she's into. Meanwhile, Gulpin and crew are supposedly looking for Fester as he's on the run from his prior robbery, which may link to what's going on in Crackstone Crypt. After the movie ends, Wednesday is positively smitten by that experience, allowing Tyler to open up about his feelings towards her. Of course, as much as Wednesday tries to play hard to get, Tyler knows better, and they almost get a kiss before Sheriff Gulpin cock blocks them. Now, again, this is hard to get the placement of things right, but Gulpin said that he'll look down by the lake to the other officers looking for Fester, and that as far as we're concerned, Tyler and Wednesday are on a fucking island. So, did Gulpin just swim in the dead of night across to look for Fester? Or did Fester somehow magically got his bike across into the island to start this investigation? Either way, it doesn't make logistical sense, as a lot of things in this show do. Even more perplexing is that Gulpin states that he was out looking for the suspect after the school groundskeeper found a bike nearby and figured to investigate the island on part of there being a missing boat. So again, how did the sheriff and his gang get here too? And does that mean that somehow Crackstone Crypt is within the school grounds despite literally being inaccessible by foot? Regardless, Wednesday once again dodges a bullet as Gulpin just wants them to fuck off, which ensues her returning to her dorm, only to find the entire place trashed, the diary missing, and Thing mortally wounded by a knife. She pries Thing from the blade and hurries back into Eugene's beehive to get the help of Fester to resuscitate him. Fester tries to defibrillate him to no avail, getting one of the most guilt-ridden faces that Wednesday has been able to muster. Of course, this is completely undercut by an extremely awkward line that Wednesday says, as well as Thing springing back to life, whatever that means for a hand. So, this is the first time the show undercuts what would be an emotionally strong moment for a fucking joke, if that was even the intention. Anyhow, Wednesday urges Thing to tell her who did this, and through his movements she says they stabbed him from behind. Now, I don't fucking know how the periphery of a goddamn hand works, but if I'm to assume the backhand is the behind and the forehand is the front, given how Thing was stabbed and posted on the column, wouldn't make any sense for him to supposedly gotten attacked by surprise. Unless he first got stabbed from behind and then stabbed again to be posted, but from what I see of his entry wounds, there's only one. So even when gaining details from an entity that can't even speak, the writers still find new ways to contrive why they don't have the relevant information. Wednesday warns Fester that he needs to leave as the cops are hot on his trail, and he acclimates saying he'll leave tomorrow while keeping tabs on Thing. So much for his importance in this goddamn plot. He was literally just a doorstop to said plot. Anyhow, this matter is now of Weems' concern, given that this wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment prank. Wednesday mentions that whoever did this also stole the diary, getting Weems to remark that it should have been safe kept in said sanctum. Wednesday through this confronts Weems that she knew who the monster she's been looking for is the entire time, speculating more on her suspicions about Weems. Weems has Thornhill excused before monologuing to Wednesday about Faulkner's research into hides, suggesting that Faulkner died trying to figure out if their behavior was controlled or spontaneous. Through this, Wednesday wonders why Weems never told Sheriff about this if she knew that monster was a hide all along. Weems defends this by stating that the school would have been done for, and we don't get any elaboration as to why Nevermore would be shut down because of this. In fact, Weems says that hides as a student body were banned from Nevermore 30 years ago, conveniently around the same time the Garrett Gates' situation happened, meaning that had one sprung up, would not put any onus on the school itself to be guilty, any more so than that incident happening. More importantly, if we're to believe that Weems and Mayor Walker had an arrangement going, how would this powder keg damage Nevermore if Mayor Walker could control the situation, or at the very least, understand that this wasn't Nevermore's doing? What authorial control does Sheriff Gulpin have exactly to put Nevermore in the ground, even if he supposedly has it out against them? None, I tell you, or at least not any substantiated by the show. We're just supposed to take at face value that Weems is correct about this. Furthermore, Weems suggests that Wednesday better pipe up about who she thinks is behind the monster killings, only for Wednesday to once again obstruct her on account of Weems' own pervasive measures with Wednesday regarding Rowan. Now, character-wise, again, makes sense for Wednesday to do this to Weems in particular, but given that Wednesday has been up to this point really inconsistent on what she will give info to Weems, means that the only real reason that Wednesday is not piping up is to extend this show much further than its already shortened season length. So at the quad, Wednesday and Bianca meet up as she has some information as to what Mayor Walker was looking for by way of his son. They go into the Nightshade's library where Lucas exclaims that Mayor Walker was looking for Laurel Gates since Outreach Day, and that the drowned body of Laurel Gates was never recovered. We also discover that the Gates mansion was bought a year ago by some old croon before being inherited by its caregiver, Teresa L. Glau, which, yes, is a fucking anagram for Laurel Gates. Literally Tom Marvolo Riddle all over again. Establishing all of this, Wednesday comes to the conclusion that Laurel Gates is still alive, and has been going under a pseudonym to take revenge on those who wronged her family, which also included Wednesday's parents for some reason. Now, normally I'd be upset yet again that this revelation is being spoon-fed to a character that has little dialogue between them, but this detail actually would make sense for Wednesday not to come across, given the confidentiality of this info. However, the show states that Mayor Walker was rooting this Laurel Gates out since Outreach Day, when only in episode 5 does he begin to suspect that the Gates family is still out there after that whole mishap. Also, how did Lucas get into the Nightshade library undetected and doing so without knowing how to get in? And why did they need to tell Wednesday this detail here as opposed to somewhere else? The show never elaborates. Bianca and Lucas wonder how the monster fits into all this, and Wednesday lets them in that Laurel is likely controlling the monster to do her dark schemes. They ask if Wednesday knows who the monster is, which gives her a pause before we convene on the last therapy session scene. And I'm going to get this out of the way here. For as much as this show postulates about Wednesday's intelligence, for as desperate as it has been to make her right about everything she assumes about while being a complete ass about it, would you be surprised if I were to tell you that she will falsely accuse several people of either being the monster or controlling the monster? Must be a day that ends in fucking Y, including Wednesday. Now, I'm just going to outline exactly how Wednesday comes to this conclusion as she cold opens with giving Kimbot the music box she got from that room, and then pinpoint exactly how inconclusive and dumb her conclusions are about this.
I mean, who better to slide in and out of the hospital undetected than a psychiatrist under the guise of visiting another patient?
You're not actually accusing me of murdering the mayor.
The roses you left in Eugene's room were your mistake. They were the same variety I found near your childhood bed.
I honestly have no idea what you're talking about.
There's only one reason an overqualified psychiatrist like yourself would settle in the inconsequential backwater that is Jericho. It allowed you to crawl through the troubled, young minds of outcasts until you found one that you can manipulate to exact your revenge.
You know what? I don't have time to deal with your delusional fantasies. I have a patient emergency.
Who? Xavier? I know all about the secret sessions you've been holding in your car. I also found the cave in the woods where you've been holding sessions to unlock his hide.
You are so out of line.
Do you know how violently unpredictable a hide can be? Or was your plan to have Xavier committed before you could turn on you too?
Wednesday, you need help. More help than I can give you.
Who are you calling, Xavier?
Judge Reynolds. I'm going to recommend you stay in a juvenile psychiatric facility for observation.
Oh, please. You and I both know I'd be running that place in a week. Time's up, Laurel.
Okay, let's break this down. If Kimbot was using her psychiatrist credentials to sneak in to kill the mayor under what he likely knows, then Wednesday, why didn't she do the same for Eugene? She had just as many, if not more opportunities to kill him if she suspected he found out who burned out that cave. And I'm sorry, but her having a bouquet of flowers that just so happened to match the ones in her room isn't concrete proof of anything. That'd be like saying that someone dying in a car crash with Need for Speed Most Wanted in hand meant that I was responsible for their death because I too have a copy of Most Wanted. And let's just also break down the moralistic cases that Wednesday jabs at Kimbot, that she supposedly doesn't care about being a therapist, and use it as a way to pour into the minds of those she can use for her own ends. Like, I get that Wednesday is a sociopathic cunt, but that doesn't mean that everyone else around her is. And, considering that Wednesday has been uncooperative about this whole thing since day one, what fucking right does she have to judge the efficacy of it? Furthermore, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Wednesday is right about all of this. What the fuck was her contingency? She didn't call backup, had cops on hand, a means of defense, nothing. What if Kimbot shot her dead on the spot, kidnapped her, or locked her up to be killed by the monster? What was the fucking plan, Wednesday, if things went awry? Oh, maybe she didn't have one because somehow Wednesday knows that Kimbot isn't the one controlling the monster, in spite of her confidence in stating as such. In fact, she's so fucking confident that she, for no discernible reason, leaves the music box behind. Why is this damning if I just told you that Kimbot isn't the master and wouldn't have any reason to care about the box? Well, that'll be saved for what will happen to Kimbot next. So, Kimbot states that after Wednesday's stunt, that she'll have her put into a psych ward, and Wednesday storms out, thinking she too has brass balls. Kimbot also calls Weems, distraught as to why Wednesday would do such a thing until she hears a ruckus in the next room and gets mauled by the monster herself. So was the monster just being chilling while Wednesday was accusing Kimbot of all this shit? Because damn, that's incredibly lucky that she showed up at this time for the session that Kimbot had, as if it was anyone else would have been inconsequential. But it is, and that means that Wednesday's only piece of evidence has now been dropped at the lap of the fucking monster too. Great going there. Now, given that Kimbot is currently dead, that she explicitly told Weems that Wednesday confronted her, off campus no less, before she died, and on a day without a scheduled session with her, this should be curtains for Wednesday, right? Nope! No mention of it, and the next scene plays out regardless of the trouble Wednesday continues to bring herself on. So as I said, that whole off-campus violation would be completely forgotten in this episode going forward. Wednesday, in spite of the setback, states that this ends now, and walks off, ready to confront who she believes is the monster. We pan back to Xavier's shed, and I should reiterate that it is yet again unlocked, and especially so at night, if we're made to believe he only locks it up at night. And we're going to find out just how badly that will sting for him soon. So, like with Kimbot, Wednesday confronts Xavier at his shed, getting him to state that she needs to stay out of his space, which, if he believed that, would have locked the front door, but regardless, Wednesday blindly accuses Xavier of a variety of things that I'll also clip here too.
You left that in my room. Actually, you left it in Thing. How long have you been seeing Kinbot?
Have you? What am I saying? Of course you have. You've been spying on me, right? Because I'm the villain in your fantasy. My father thinks that my mental health is a PR problem that he needs to manage. He wanted to keep his troubled son out of the tabloids. I wasn't in your room. Believe me or don't believe me. I don't care.
Your painting's been improving. I enjoy this one in particular. Feels like you really loved it.
What do you want?
I'm asking the questions. What is Roan's inhaler doing in your shed? Are Eugene's glasses?
Whoa, whoa.
Are these stalker images you took of me?
No.
Don't forget your latest edition. Kinbot's necklace.
No. Somebody planted that stuff.
Please! Drop the knife!
Again, let's break this down. So, if Xavier had gone and stabbed Thing, then why the fuck didn't he do so when he was in Ophelia Hall earlier, when he was alone, believing that Wednesday and crew were going to find out that he was the monster? Secondly, Wednesday, if you fucking believe that Xavier tried to kill Thing and killed Kimbot, is it really a goddamn smart idea to leave a knife for Xavier to grab freely, you psychotic dumbass? Thirdly, yes, you've already tried to pin the paintings on him, but if you remember Wednesday, he met up with Kimbot to warn her that he had a dream of her dying. So why would Xavier warn someone that they're going to die if he was planning on killing them anyway? And fourth and most stringent, does Wednesday find it just a little bit sketchy that all the damning evidence to pin Xavier on as a monster is lying in wait on his countertop? I mean, this is also Xavier's fault, as he is incredibly inconsistent on locking the goddamn shed if he wants his private time, and not for people like Wednesday or more unscrupulous folks to plant some shit on him. And let's just say again, for the sake of argument, that Xavier wanted to have keepsakes of his victims on him. Why didn't he have a keepsake for the hiker, the bum, or any of the other victims prior to Wednesday arriving at Nevermore, huh? And if he did have keepsakes, I highly fucking doubt that he would have them in a place that he knows that Wednesday has constantly barged in on to make him look bad. The weirdest accusation Wednesday makes about Xavier beyond everything else is that he was safekeeping those pictures of her, which is incongruent with her pinning Kimbot as Laurel Gates if she left the music box for her to bear the flat of the blade, knowing she got those pictures from said music box. Or the fact that with as vivid as Xavier can make pictures, would give him no need to take pictures anyway, even if he supposedly was stalking her. Or, better yet, let's look back at all the examples of how Xavier couldn't have possibly been the monster given what he has told Wednesday. He told her what and where the Gates mansion was, unlike a certain other character who has gravitated around her. It would make no sense for him to kill Rowan if he simultaneously first doubted then believed her assessment of him being dead. It would make no sense for him to go after Eugene, seeing as he couldn't have possibly known when you and him were going to go out looking for that cave, nor cared to know what she was doing after the goddamn dance. So yeah, if we blatantly ignore all this information that Wednesday should know or rationally comes to terms with, she's totally fucking right on accusing him of this. And because Xavier is a dumbass, he incriminates himself by holding a knife that stabbed Thing for gulping the barge in to arrest him. I guess at least this time Wednesday had a contingency, but had Galpin been a few seconds late, and assuming Xavier is the monster, Wednesday would have been the monster's next victim. Now, I could forgive all this dumbass shit that led up to this moment, but the next thing that Xavier pipes out of his mouth has got to be, no hyperbole, the most idiotic thing to say in this exact scenario.
I should have let Rowan kill you.
Now, I understand that emotions are high and that Xavier is positively pissed about the situation, but let's just try to humor you for a moment. Xavier, if you know you aren't the monster, and you believe that you are being framed, do you sincerely think stating that, "I should have let Rowan kill you," as you are being arrested, helps in any conceivable way? Do you understand why Miranda rights exist? To stop dipshits like you from incriminating yourself further. Not to mention, I know that Xavier is saying that in regards to him saving her from getting crushed by that gargoyle, but given what Wednesday accuses him of, him saying it in this context means that Wednesday would rationalize that he was the monster killing Rowan to save her from death. And wouldn't you believe it, Wednesday is going to be wrong about this accusation she made on Xavier too. So that's 2 for 2 on making what the writers establish as a smart character only become a pretentious dipshit on the other side. As for Xavier, it really puts the hilarious irony what he says to Bianca, considering the sheer amount of duplicity, spying, and outright gaslighting Wednesday does to him throughout this show, yet he puts up with it, has led him being Me Too'd and his whole life ruined, making me think that somehow Bianca is even more wretched than Wednesday is, in spite of how little there is to establish such a thing, if I'm made to believe that Bianca was too duplicitous for even Xavier to interact with. And as for Sheriff Galpin, does he think it's a bit strange that Xavier is reacting the way he is if he was told by Wednesday that he's the monster? Or better yet, doubt it given that he told her about the DNA results, because I guarantee you that Wednesday likely also told him that the bloody rag belonged to him as well. And as far as I'm concerned, at worst, Xavier would be detained for questioning as opposed to arrested, as there once again would still be an ongoing investigation as to the veracity of Wednesday's claim, but this show at the near end has a habit of just making the pace go a mile a minute. And if this episode constantly kicking me in the dick, shins, and mouth wasn't already insulting enough, the rubbing alcohol of this show's utter disdain for my own patience smears in. Wednesday comes back to her dorm to find that Enid has returned, wanting to stay on account of what happened regarding the place and thing, as well as forgiving Wednesday about her behavior from last episode. So yeah, so much for that drama between them, on top of Wednesday having this utter prude of a line that just makes me want to tell her personally, shut the fuck up. You've never been right about anything and you'll be proven wrong constantly, you stupid bitch. We get one more scene where Wednesday meets Tyler at the weather vane late at night, I suppose as a way to finish up on what they were planning on doing, and in they catch a few kisses to make up for it. And in, Wednesday gets a vision where she sees Kimbok being murdered and discovers that Tyler was in fact the monster all along. So with that in mind, let's just go into just the many, many ways this turned out lucky for Tyler. For one, given the incredibly inconsistent nature of Wednesday's powers, the only thing that is consistent is that Wednesday just needs to touch something in order to get a vision. So you mean to tell me that somehow throughout this entire fucking show, that at no point she did so by accident to Tyler to get a vision that would help her out? Only with her bumping into Tyler at the dance, and only with a fucking kiss was the only time she did so? I guess she isn't much for person-to-person contact, but this is a huge contrivance given what the powers establish. Not to mention that Tyler at no point knew that Wednesday had these kinds of powers or how they worked. So for all he knew, he could have risked accidentally giving away his identity to Wednesday without realizing it. But lucky those powers didn't for the sake of the plot. Secondly, had Wednesday had Tyler split up with Enid or her with Tyler, his little stunt to pretend to get attacked by the monster would have fallen apart, much more so than the oddity of the monster only going after a single swipe. Or, better yet, if they had split up, Tyler could have either killed Enid or Wednesday too, given the circumstances, so great going there, writers. And had Wednesday not brought Enid with her to the Gates mansion, means that Tyler would have had the opportunity to kill or capture Wednesday right there and then. The only reason Tyler doesn't do it when they have their date at Crackstone Crypt was that, presumably, he was using that as a diversion to allot the Master to ransack the diary from Ophelia Hall. But I guarantee you, had Sheriff Galpin not barged in, he absolutely would have made his mark on Wednesday too. Or, better yet, way back in episode 3, when Tyler suggested taking Wednesday to Cobham Woods, and only being denied such because of a utterly contrived line by Wednesday to book it alone. Either to give credence to the notion that Xavier is somehow the monster, or because the writers knew that Tyler wouldn't have taken her there had she taken his offer. Thirdly, remember that line Tyler said to Xavier at the dance? How in the fuck did he know where to scope out Wednesday and Eugene in order to attack Eugene if he hadn't a clue where they went? I know that he must have known that they were scoping out the cave at this time with what Wednesday says to Eugene, but knowing where Eugene ran off to in a panic is another degree that I can't believe. And furthermore, if Tyler is the monster, that means that had Thing not brought it upon himself to guilt trip Wednesday to go to the dance with him, and had she not gone to the dance with him anyway, Eugene would have been fine, and likely Wednesday and him would have found out who the monster was much sooner than not. This is also why, in spite of already establishing Eugene's cowardice about going into the cave in the daytime, that him doing so at night, in spite of Wednesday's objections, was just a means to get him out of the story. And we can also go into how utterly stupid it was that the Master just had this cave with incriminating info out for people to discover and only just now decided to get rid of it at this time when we do figure out who the Master really is. It also puts into extreme detail the
Incredible luck.
of Tyler and the Master to go about doing this with the arrival of the Pilgrim Bullies prank as a fog, as had they not, would have also saved Eugene's hide to not be effectively fridged. As I said, Ajax getting stoned and then refusing to tell Enid why he flaked would compound the trite nonsense of the story further down the line. Or how about how the Pilgrim Bullies cornering Wednesday at the parking lot gave Tyler the opportunity to kill Rowan by way of his slow murder exposition, and of Wednesday bumping into him when the boys gave chase, as yet another example of the duo's
Incredible luck.
Fourthly, let's also go into the circumstances that allowed Tyler to go about killing Kimbot. One, that he happened to have this session with her just as Wednesday stormed in. Two, that Wednesday did so in such a way for him to be in the opposite room as not to immediately expose himself as a monster. Third, that Wednesday was fucking stupid enough to leave the music box so that when Tyler did kill Kimbot, he could take that as well, and that at no point during the call did Kimbot call out for Tyler if she knew he was in the opposite room with her during their session. Lastly, let's go into how exactly Tyler was able to move in and out as a monster without anyone noticing. Working backwards, let's start with episode 6 regarding his fake encounter with himself. He managed to scare Wednesday and Enid from the basement and get back to assume the position at the garage entrance without neither noticing him, and doing so just as Xavier arrived to incriminate himself again? Or how about when he gave Wednesday a scare at the old meeting house in episode 3? He was working at the weather vane at Outreach Day while this all happened. I know a lot of people are going to say, maybe he was taking his 15-minute break, but that's assuming we see any of the other staff, as, like with Nevermore, it seems the only person who works there is fucking Tyler. Better yet, Xavier was working as a volunteer there and also happened to flake on his duties to check in on Wednesday, presumably the same time that Tyler had also done so. So did it not occur to Xavier that Tyler's sudden absence a bit precocious? Or better yet, how would Tyler even get back to the weather vane without raising suspicions if A, the vision Wednesday gets clearly shows that Tyler either has to remove his clothes or they get ripped out when he turns into the monster, and B, it was raining when he had done this. That means he would have had to slip into the public sphere naked and drenched without anyone catching wise to it, dry himself up somehow back into his work clothes in a reasonable time between when he left and came back, and if that didn't work, contrive some reason to the employees that don't exist while he was so long on his lunch break. It makes me think that the writers thought this reveal was clever, but only on surface it was, and examining it further makes it seem as though Tyler only became the monster this episode, as everything else surrounding the means of which Tyler got around inexplicable if we are to believe he is the monster. And that is the end of episode 7. And I'm not going to split any hairs, this is by far the worst fucking episode in the entire show. Oh, episode 8 certainly has some extremely dumb things, but all of that is in context of finding out who the Master is in relation to just how many working parts they had to account for to make their plan work. But with the shitty pacing, stupid bold-faced accusation Wednesday makes, while delivering us one of the stupidest lines for a character to say in the situation that they are in, while constantly stepping on the toes of what the other episodes established, this episode takes the goddamn cake. And maybe that's also why Uncle Fester's inclusion was made, as a way to soften the blow of the utter horseshit this episode piles on top of me, while cynically cashing the nostalgic check they had no right to. And, of course, who can forget the reveal of Tyler being the monster all along, which further drives a canyon across the show's plot by way of the
Incredible luck.
for him to not been caught as it's thus far. So how will the final episode fast track any semblance of a plot together? Do you really think this far in they're going to? Then you must have more hope for this show than I do. Well, here we are, folks. Nearly 3 hours of stupid bullshit for the sake of the plot, a litany of contrivances, various character assassinations, and listless arcs have all led to this pivotal moment, how this steaming pile of crap all comes together. Starting episode 8, we see Tyler wandering around somewhere with trepidation before Wednesday springs up. Tyler assumes that this is yet another date before Wednesday gives him a cold open, similarly to the one she gave Kimbot and Xavier. Unlike the clips I gave you, this one I'll try to summarize in brief. First, Wednesday comes to the correct assumption that Tyler planted all that shit on Xavier to frame him as a monster, while simultaneously still believing that Kimbot is the Laurel Gates that unlocked his hide abilities. Now, this is something I didn't touch on before that others would likely ask: why did Tyler kill Kimbot, especially knowing at this venture that she couldn't have possibly been the master? I think it comes down to what Kimbot threatened to do to Wednesday, which would cause a wedge in what the real master intends to do with Wednesday. And we'll get to that too, don't worry. What I find hilarious about how Wednesday opines on all of this is that she brings up the very pointed arguments that I brought up regarding how neither Xavier nor Kimbot could possibly have been culpable for being the master slash Hyde, whereas Tyler could be. I guess hindsight is 20/20, huh? Like with Xavier and Kimbot, Tyler pleads his innocence and tries to leave before Wednesday has her posse subdue him with the Psion powers via Bianca. Now, this is the only time that we've seen these powers properly used, and boy will it cause problems for the near climax of this episode, on top of everything else regarding said climax. Should Xavier's back, Tyler awakens to find himself in chains as Wednesday proceeds to interrogate him on the matter of him being a Hyde. Firstly, Wednesday brings up the fencing photo we briefly saw in episode 1, as one person of note was Tyler's mother, who Sheriff Galpin married. Presumably, she died of a postpartum depression through her autopsy, but Wednesday believes that she was a Hyde and had an outburst. On top of this, Wednesday also surmises that Galpin's entire desperation to pin Nevermore on the monster killings was a cope in the hopes that his son wasn't responsible given his tragic past with his wife. Again, how Wednesday acquired this was through Thing, once again off screen with no semblance of time between the end of episode 7 and 8, and having this reveal at the end of the show rather than made as subtext between Galpin and Tyler is just honestly rude to their relationship dynamic. And while it is true that Tyler is the monster, a lot of this ancillary evidence Wednesday provides doesn't really help her find anything regarding the master, as she already has Tyler dead to rights in his position. Needless to say, she really needs to prove that he's a monster by torturing him regarding the notes that Faulkner wrote as an excuse. Of course, all the other students were fine with kidnapping and extorting someone for information presumed to be a killer, but apparently draw the line at torture and walk off, letting Wednesday do her thing. Now, one extra twist of the knife that this episode does in particular is, unlike the other episodes where the intro is mercifully short, this one uses the same long opener of episode 1, I suppose as a way to tie it all together. When, if anything, nothing about the opener has any relation to what has been established up to this point, and very little to go on regarding the Addams family as an entity in this show, so really, this is compensation for something. As the episode properly starts, we pan around Galpin as he's listening to recordings of Kimbot regarding her sessions with Tyler and her concerns that anything to do with his mother sends him into a completely different mood. What's perplexing about this is, while this is worrisome for Galpin, why didn't Kimbot bring any of this to his attention? Like, I get that Kimbot said that all of these conversations are purely confidential, but if the person you're having a session with is acting like a completely different person and having homicidal thoughts, maybe it's time to let the grown-ups talk, maybe? Better yet, we know Kimbot never made an attempt to bring this up, as in episode 2, Galpin was annoyed that Tyler and Kimbot were keeping their sessions to themselves. And seeing that Galpin had worried about Tyler's outburst, it does lend credence to the idea that he knew all along that these monster attacks were his doing and he didn't want to admit it. But we can go into that a bit later into the episode. So, the students thankfully make the right call to bring up Wednesday's torture session to Weems, as apparently Wednesday didn't find Weems helpful. Why? Who the fuck knows? Wednesday has been topsy-turvy with her relationship with Weems, and it will continue to roller coaster out for as little more time we'll have with Weems. She also makes this information apparent to Galpin, as he's a cop, and that it's his son on the line here. Now, I'm sure this fucking time, this will surely make it so Wednesday gets properly expelled from the school, unlike all the other examples of how she fucked her second chance. Yeah, we'll get to that. Anyhow, like deja vu, Galpin shows up just in time to stop Wednesday bashing Tyler's brains in. Of course, How the fuck Wednesday didn't account for this happening, or that the other students wouldn't be so keen on her using Tyler like a pincushion, is beyond me, given her more tactful methods regarding Xavier and Kimbot. But you trade out one stupid decision for an equally stupid decision, and you just end up getting stupid. At the sheriff's office, remarkably, Sheriff Galpin doesn't charge kidnapping or assault, battery, vigilantism, entrapment, etc., as Wednesday believes that Galpin only did that to cover for his son, accusing and questioning him on whether he knew that the thing she brought him belonged to Tyler all this time. Now, I made a mention as a text note that's nowhere throughout this show up to this point that Wednesday doubted Galpin's official report of the DNA authorization, so having her spring this upon him now is a bit baffling, as even to this day, I still am not sure if Galpin did know all along or not. Before she can get any answers on that, Weems insists she go with her to be punished her way, but not before Tyler can give his own goodbyes.
What does it feel like?
What does what feel like?
To lose. You know, first, I'd wake up naked, covered in blood. No idea what happened. But over time, I started to remember everything. The sound of their screams, panic in their eyes, and fear so primal I could taste it. And it was delicious. You have no idea what's coming.
Now, I should emphasize very strongly that this is a arrogantly stupid thing for Tyler to say this to Wednesday in this place when there is a receptionist just a few feet behind him who likely heard all of this. Furthermore, considering that Tyler didn't know that Wednesday had the ability to inconsistently tap into his mind, how the fuck is Tyler so cocksure that she doesn't have some kind of recorder to tape all of this? Or, better yet, have Weems storm in to wonder what's keeping up Wednesday, only to notice Tyler give these vaguely threatening lines to her this way? This is straight up some Saturday morning cartoon villain nonsense where they give a monologue for all to hear, not knowing it, but it's worse because Tyler knows there's people here. I mean, there definitely could have been more prescient places for him to give his villain monologue that will establish in this fucking episode, but here is utterly retarded. So at Weems' office, Weems gives the formal announcement that Wednesday will be expelled as a result of what she did to Tyler, regardless of whatever attempt at pleading to Weems Wednesday brings to the table that Tyler is a Hyde, and she can prove as thus. Again, this is the only time that Weems personally condemns her for impunitive behavior regarding this entire investigation and not making her a part of it, especially noteworthy given how sporadic Wednesday has been to gatekeep certain information about the investigation to Weems. Now, while it does make sense Wednesday wouldn't make Weems a part of this given her chicanery earlier regarding Rowan, her having inadvertently brought up what Rowan said to her to who she thought was Rowan, giving Weems the illustration in episode 6, and still as of yet tried to pin Kimbot as Laurel Gates, means that Wednesday has already undid a lot of the goodwill she could warrant to Weems, which pales in comparison to how helpful she attempted being with Galpin, a guy who from the get was distrusting of Wednesday, was getting and locking up Gomez Addams just for the righteous indignation of it all, and now, on Wednesday's own account, had been curtailing her investigation to protect Tyler. It's a very distorted mess of Wednesday's own trust of certain people, which may very well play into another theme of this show, but of course, none of her misplaced trust in other people is concretely established, as are her unearned mistrust of another. In the jail, Xavier is moping around in his new Hannibal Lecter getup before Wednesday sneaks in, trying to apologize to Xavier and explain that Tyler is the real Hyde. Of course, the only reason Wednesday is here is in the hopes that Xavier had drawn up something that could help her pin Tyler as the Hyde, to which Xavier obviously doesn't and continues to lay into her, which is simply delicious to me how Wednesday believes that Xavier would even bother helping her after how much damage she's done to his reputation. The only suggestion Xavier gives to Wednesday is that she fucking leave, as if she does, that prophecy she brings out can't happen. Yeah, I'm surprised Wednesday didn't think of that at any point this entire time as a possibility, especially when she was just about to attempt leaving Nevermore near the end of episode 1 if she believes that she'll bring the downfall of Nevermore, somehow. I should mention at this point that Wednesday only has so much time to try to fix this, as she'll be sent home tomorrow afternoon. With Xavier unhelpful, Weems indisposed, and Bianca and her posse a stick in the mud, there's really only 2 other people Wednesday can confide in. Enid gives her goodbyes and is somewhat upset that Wednesday will be leaving her, having acclimated to her quirky behavior. Even Wednesday feels that she's had what we like to call a character arc in the time she's been here, that she finds herself a disappointment instead of believing that other people would be, which is why she's keen on working alone. Yeah, apparently that working alone aspect didn't apply regarding investigating the Gates mansion for some reason. Regardless, Wednesday says what Xavier suggests to Enid as a good move, only remiss that Tyler is still free from accountability. Now, Enid reassures her that the school should be quite protected against him given the beasts and baddies roaming about it, and boy won't that fact completely escape what happens at the climax too. Don't worry. Enid also makes it a note to Wednesday that Eugene has finally recovered from his injuries to be responsive, marking him as the only other person Wednesday can confide in. Wednesday gives her goodbyes to the Nightshades. Yeah, apparently that whole posse was the make of them. Would have eluded me, and a warning regarding what Tyler and this master may intend. Thornhill also shows up to give Wednesday a parting gift of her own that I'm sure is in no way her own metaphorical dunce cap for her efforts here. On top of that, Weems as well shows up saying that she'll personally take her to the station, but not before Wednesday requests one last favor, on top of all the other last favors she's asked of her, that Weems is perturbed by but obliges regardless. So Wednesday greets a mostly recovered Eugene and actually opens with apologizing for having prioritized going to the dance over going with Eugene to scope out the cave. Wow, I'm glad that the writers remembered something wretched about Wednesday that they had to course correct, otherwise I wouldn't root for this character or something. Anyhow, Wednesday also warns Eugene about going back to Nevermore as she finds it a danger before Eugene tells Wednesday about what he had seen at that cave, giving this suddenly important detail about what they were wearing at said cave.
What about her boots?
There was an explosion of light, and just for a moment, I thought that they weren't black. They were red.
Now, with this in mind, let's first remember what Weems said to Wednesday about jumping the gun at any evidence she's given regardless of the finer details. First off, the way in which Eugene exposits this info is not assured, so why Wednesday would find this a revelation is astounding. Secondly, like with assuming Kimbot was Laurel Gates because she saw a similar bouquet of flowers in 2 places, how can Wednesday assume that this is proof that Thornhill was Laurel Gates as opposed to literally anyone else who wore red boots when burning out that cave? And do you mean to tell me that Thornhill didn't bother to change the single most defining aspect about her clothing to not incriminate herself to would-be peeping Toms? Now granted, when Thornhill burned out that cave, likely believed that Wednesday and Eugene would have waited until tomorrow to scope out that cave to warrant not worrying about someone spying on her, but given how clinical and calculated they've been about every other detail to cover their tracks, I don't buy the excuse that something as fundamental as an article of clothing would have not been accounted for. Furthermore, if what Eugene is saying is true, and that Thornhill was the one who burned out the cave and ostensibly the Laurel Gates Wednesday is looking for, you mean to tell me that she didn't have any opportunity to kill Eugene while incapacitated like she did Mayor Walker? Like I said, she would have had more opportunities with not only the amount of time he was out, but also that she was a fellow teacher of Nevermore as opposed to some lowly therapist. Now, you could say that she possibly couldn't because Thing was watching him, but also given that Thing seems to be where the plot wants him to be, is a contrivance that isn't enough to account for Eugene's survival this late in the game. Speaking of, why did Tyler stop at just a few slices on Eugene? he wasn't burdened by time or even the possibility of Wednesday stopping him from doing so like he was with Rowan, so why not risk any chance of him coming out of this alive? And if he does, that circles back into the question as to how Thornhill never got a chance to finish the job on him if she
believe there's even a 1% chance
that he saw who burned out that cave. We can go more in depth as to how Thornhill being Laurel Gates and what Thornhill has been able to accomplish as Laurel Gates is utterly absurd, but there's a lot more dialogue that Thornhill will say that will allow us to break it all down. So, Wednesday returns to Nevermore. Yes, I know you're wondering how, given that Weems planned on taking her home. We'll get to that. More specifically, Thornhill's greenhouse to confront Thornhill like she did with Xavier. Like she did with Tyler. You know the fucking drill at this point. As Wednesday opines, Tyler also shows up as though on cue to confirm all this, which for some reason doesn't get Thornhill wondering why Tyler would just show up to admit to all of this if their intention was trying to keep this on the down low. So, of course, Thornhill blatantly incriminates herself by suggesting Tyler take care of Wednesday, confirming everything to not only Wednesday, but to Weems, as it turns out that she was just pretending to be Tyler all along. Now, let's just go into just how fucked this situation is. To summarize, only by Eugene's not so confident account of all of this, Wednesday was able to convince Weems to not only take her back to Nevermore to confront Thornhill as the Master, but to pretend to be Tyler in such a way that Thornhill would just let slip all her dirty secrets to her without so much as questioning whether any of what Wednesday is saying is true, and knowing whether Thornhill would be so blatant about her devious plan this way. Yeah, that's quite a huge fucking stretch for Weems to give any inch to Wednesday's plea when Weems just lambasted her for her impulsiveness on any bit of evidence given to her. Or, how about Weems bringing up the questions that I would bring up regarding the veracity of these claims based on hearsay regarding a pair of red fucking boots would immediately put Wednesday's assuredness of Thornhill being the Master into question. Or just even the simple possibility that regardless if Wednesday is right about any of this, that Weems wouldn't even entertain doing this in the first place. So Weems and Wednesday are about ready to put Laurel in the clink, but not before Laurel can stealth kill a woman a whole foot taller than her, sounds like deja vu, with an injection of the nightshade poison Garrett had to her neck. Also at this point, I'm going to refer to Thornhill as Laurel. I mean, she even stated it herself. But regardless, keep this item in note regarding what Laurel said about her bigger plan in motion. But seriously, Weems literally just stands there and lets Thornhill do this with no reaction. It is also hilarious that now for the third time a character Gwendolyn Christie plays as is killed off in a really unsatisfying way. Great going there, writers. Wednesday can't do much but get knocked out herself by Laurel with a shovel to the face because apparently, in spite of Wednesday's cat-like reflexes and martial arts skill, couldn't have guessed that Laurel was going to deal with her in kind, this stupid cunt. But hey, at least Thing was there to catch all of this undetected so he can send help because, as I said, he's where the plot needs him to be and where he doesn't need to be. And do you also mean to tell me that at no point when Wednesday and Weems decided to confront Thornhill this way that they didn't possibly expect Laurel to fight her way out of this mess? At Ophelia Hall, Ajax and Enid are perpetually stuck at first base before getting a call by Eugene, asking them what's going on with Wednesday and Weems, as well as explaining to Enid, and by extension Ajax, that Thornhill was behind it all and were planning on confronting her, as opposed to sending Wednesday off to the station as planned. Furthermore, Thing also storms in to let Enid, and by extension the audience, know that Weems is dead and that Tyler and Laurel took Wednesday to Crackstone Crypt, wanting to enlist the help of the Nightshades by way of Ajax to deal with them. They leave Eugene on hold as he himself decides to take it upon himself to risk life and limb to save Wednesday, in spite of his parents' best wishes. It will be important what his mom says to him about calling the sheriff, as I'm sure you're wondering how Tyler and Thornhill will account for an entire police unit on their ass, and wouldn't you believe they do it in a really dumb way. But more on that in a moment, as Eugene's enthusiasm will also amount to a payoff, if you can call it that, for this show as well. Strung up by her wrists, Wednesday awakes in Crackstone Crypt to Tyler, making a joke regarding the familiarity of this place. Wednesday chastises Tyler for his blind loyalty to Laurel as his master before Laurel sends him away to the boat. I suppose they also spent all day dragging Wednesday here between the time when Laurel killed Weems, knocked out Wednesday, and went to Crackstone Crypt, as well as Thing 2, even though the distance between the greenhouse and Ophelia Hall isn't far. Again, time is quite convoluted in this episode especially. With Laurel and Wednesday alone, it's time to monologue some more. Mainly, that Laurel finds Crackstone a visionary and that after what happened with her brother, she tried a different approach. An approach that was so bafflingly convoluted, especially considering the only reason that Garrett's approach failed was that he was too horny for Morticia to focus his iron on Gomez, as opposed to killing him and everyone at Nevermore discreetly like he could have. Yeah, about that discretionary method in a moment. Anyhow, Laurel explains that with the book she stole from the replica meeting house, a detail that I forgive you for getting from episode 3, as well as all the body parts she's collected, she can attempt to resurrect Crackstone. How does Wednesday fit into this? Well, apparently, the sealed goodie trapped Crackstone's soul in with the book needs a direct descendant to unlock it, and that Laurel needed to keep Wednesday around in Nevermore just long enough during the full blood moon in order to do so. And with that particular revelation, let's go into the numerous, frankly, astronomical ways in which this plan would have gone awry. First off, Laurel had to not only account that Wednesday would have gotten expelled from the prior school she was at, but that her family would have taken her to Nevermore next, given that Wednesday has hopped between 8 schools in the last 5 years, according to Weems, and having done so just shy of roughly a month before said blood moon would occur. Secondly, she would have had to assure that Wednesday somehow stayed at Nevermore, which Laurel didn't really do, and only by way of the conveniently vague nature of Rowan's murder exposition did she do so. Going on that, it's also lucky that Laurel had Weems clean up her dirty work for her and likely somehow knew she would do so. But given that Laurel didn't know Weems was a shapeshifter until just a few minutes ago, means that she didn't account for Rowan being sprung back to life and thus couldn't have taken part of the cover-up as I mentioned all the way back in part 1 for this exact reason. And even if Laurel didn't look a gift horse in the mouth by this convenience, she still wouldn't have taken part as it would lead culpability back to her if Wednesday found out it was covered up. Not to mention that Laurel had to time her monster killings in such a way to account for Wednesday's arrival as to not burden Gulpin with wanting to bring his son to account if he knew his son was doing the monster killings all along, as well as assuming that Gulpin wouldn't have brought his son to justice upon the slightest hint of him being responsible for the monster killings too. Or, better yet, why didn't Laurel already get the body parts way before Wednesday's arrival? If time is of the essence regarding this blood moon, then why muddy the process of this revival by only collecting pieces as you are also trying to keep a lonely teenager wrapped around your finger, trying to keep a unruly beast wrapped around your other finger, while managing a class, and while keeping this all under not only Weems's nose, but Mayor Walker's nose as well, which brings up the timeliness Weems to even do any of what she's accomplished. Remember when I said the timing of that 11 o'clock event at the dance would be relevant? Well, it is, as when Eugene arrives at the cave, he mentions in his recording he arrived there at 9 o'clock. So that means that Laurel had a roughly 2-hour window from what Tyler likely told her about what Wednesday and Eugene knows to deal with that evidence. The question, of course, is why didn't Laurel figure that someone would eventually find this cave, especially if Eugene had known about this cave for some time given his beekeeping habits? Or even why Laurel would have a cave out like this, even if only to break Tyler's will, if she could have just as easily done so at the Gates mansion, where she was collecting all the samples, had an altar, and used that car to run over Mayor Walker? And when did Laurel exactly have the time to burn out that cave without Weems or any of the students wondering her absence, especially given the location of this cave is never mentioned relative to the distance of Nevermore as a whole? It kind of makes me think the existence of the Gates mansion only came to pass in episode 6 going onward, on top of that cave's existence only being an invention of episode 4 going onward. And seeing as I did bring up the Gates mansion, how in the fuck did Laurel manage to clean up the car, the samples, the room, and the altar by herself? Tyler couldn't have helped as he was currently pretending to be injured by the hide at Gulpin's house, And where did she exactly dump the evidence of her room, the altar, and that car exactly that no one would find? I know that Laurel likely had a head start given what Wednesday said about the candles when she was scoping out the place, but even then, the sheer expediency of her to do this is extremely jarring. Here's another detail that almost escaped me when discovering all this, but when Laurel had presumably ransacked Ophelia Hall and stolen Faulkner's diary, why didn't she also take the music box Wednesday snatched as well? She made it a point to completely clean out the Gates mansion of any trace of evidence, yet kept the only missing piece of it in Wednesday's hands just so she could accuse Kimbot of being the ringleader with it? Because I already went into detail why, music box or no, Wednesday had practically nothing to go off on but conjecture regarding Kimbot as a suspect. And I don't think the reason for this is that Wednesday had it in person, because if she did, she likely also would have had Faulkner's diary handy at all times. The only thing that Wednesday ever seems to keep on hand is some of Xavier's sketches and the illustration of her from that book. One more minor yet still troubling detail about all of this. Remember that scene where Laurel had gone into the Nightshade's library? As far as we're concerned up to this point, that scene goes nowhere. But we now have to infer that she was studying Faulkner's diary as it was planted there. But if so, then why didn't Laurel keep that diary for herself, especially if she planned on taking it back once Wednesday had it? Maybe you could suggest that she knew where it was, but couldn't crack the safe unlike Thing could. But then again, seeing as Faulkner and others died trying to research hides, how else would Laurel know how to control Tyler without it? Which yet again circles back to the question of why Laurel wouldn't keep said diary if she made it a point to ransack Ophelia Hall to take it back from Wednesday. The only other way you could reason this is that Laurel wanted Wednesday to find that diary so she could inevitably accuse Kimbot of it, but that is contradicted by her decision to then steal it back from her once Tyler is made aware that Wednesday has it. There's other problems of Laurel's plan here that I'll go into soon, but there's a lot that Laurel says to Wednesday about it that I can bring up when relevant. I also want to bring up a matter regarding the nature of what being a direct descendant of Goody means, but I don't want to put my foot in my mouth until that is explained and shown also. What I lastly want to bring issue with is the nature of this entire setup that Goody put together. So, you mean to tell me that at no point could Goody elucidate to Wednesday that she had gone, killed Crackstone, and trapped his soul in some seal that only a direct descendant could open? The only hint that Goody gives is this line at episode 2, and reminder, this is the first time Wednesday has been made witness to this entity in her visions up to this point, meaning that for all she knows, Wednesday is merely hallucinating her. And how does "you are the key" translate in any way to "you are fundamental in a ritual reviving Crackstone"? Huh? In fact, a lot of Goody's help in these visions have been nothing but unhelpful, like how her pointing Wednesday to the Gates mansion did little to help in her investigation, apart from the suggestion that Laurel Gates is still alive and the cryptic clue regarding the music box. Also, why would Goody manufacture a seal like this with any intent to release the soul you've caged in the first place? That somehow Goody would suddenly have a change of heart about Crackstone and let his spirit rest into the afterlife? Or her descendants for that matter? Whew! Wow. That was a lot to dig in from very little. We can finally get the plot moving again. So we cut to Xavier being escorted by Gulpin and Squad Car to somewhere, I guess? Keep in mind that Xavier still has all his chains on, so shouldn't he be escorted by APC instead? And we'll get to that too, don't worry. Anyhow, Gulpin's partner calls up to inform him that Eugene told the cops that something was going down at Nevermore and that they can't make it out on account of every single police car's wheels being slashed up. Because of this, it's up to Gulpin to save the day, because in spite of the fact that Nevermore to Jericho is a 25-minute walk, according to Thornhill, assuming she wouldn't lie about a detail like that, the other cops are utterly helpless to assist. Furthermore, when did Tyler find the time to do this and without raising any suspicion? In fact, wouldn't doing this to every single squad car raise more suspicion rather than stop the would-be cops from interrupting Laurel's plan? I mean, I suppose this accounts for the length of time between what happened at the greenhouse to now, but even so, you mean to tell me no cop was on a routine patrol before noticing their wheels were slashed, and that Gulpin's car just so happened to be the only one unaffected by this sudden contrivance because for some reason he was going to take Xavier in chains personally to wherever? Back at the ritual site, Laurel drags Wednesday to the altar and cuts her palm open to release the seal on the crypt. So with that detail in mind, let's properly discuss the nature of this blood seal. Now, there's a bit of leeway to consider that when Laurel says a direct descendant means anyone who is even remotely related by blood to Goody Addams. What doesn't add up for me is that Laurel specifically needed Wednesday in person to open the seal as opposed to getting a small sample through a more subtle means and then trapping the blood with a latex glove to get the desired effect. Meaning that her plan to keep Wednesday in Nevermore is even more needlessly convoluted than it had any fucking right to be. Because there could have been a litany of ways in which Laurel could have acquired Wednesday's blood that didn't necessarily require her to stay around, like having Tyler injure her, for example, or stealing a blood sample from the doctors after her brief injury with Bianca as another, or, if we're going to get crass, somehow gather Wednesday's period blood, as apropos for teenagers her age to experience, if the other two are just not enough blood to go around. So Laurel begins the ritual process as Wednesday attempts pick-locking her chains free while in duress. The lights from the body part sample light up, electricity crackles, smoke fumes, it drags on is what I mean, before Crackstone comes to from his torpor. Now, I should mention how narratively dissonant it is how Laurel is going to bring the fight to the outcasts, by outcast means and by extension making Crackstone himself an outcast if being a normie simply means you don't have any supernatural qualities. But we'll discuss the themes of this show in the latter sections of this breakdown as I usually do, and whether it accomplishes such a task. So Laurel pleads her case to the newly revived Crackstone, but not before Wednesday attempts to subdue the both, getting Crackstone to wave his staff around to lock Wednesday in place before giving her a gut stab as penance for what Goody did to him in turn. Yeah, we'll discuss the power level of this Crackstone that Laurel so desperately needed to help rid of outcasts in a moment, because right now he's not much stronger than Rowan, but what he was able to accomplish. Throughout all of this, Enid and Ajax were just spinning their wheels in the Nightshade's library as Enid finds it a surprise that Ajax belongs to a secret society along with Bianca and the other two characters who finally get name dropped here. Good to know that Siren that nearly killed Enid was named Kent. I'm sure that's a detail I'll need to remember for Season 2. I guess they were waiting to tell Bianca and the gang about how Thornhill is really Laurel because apparently they couldn't tell them anywhere else but here, as well as Ajax showing the illustration that Wednesday has had for most of this show to Bianca, getting me to wonder just how he got a hold of it at this point. Did Thing take it from her while she was knocked out and being sent to her fate by Laurel and Tyler? Because it's not like Thing had a rucksack of his own to haul that thing when he was warning Enid and Ajax about Wednesday's fate. And not to mention how odd it is that Wednesday never once showed anyone this illustration when everyone doubted her claims about Rowan being killed at the Harvest Festival. In fact, do Bianca and the Nightshades still believe that Rowan wasn't killed at this point? I genuinely don't know, because these characters have very little screen time to opine on the veracity of such claims, but I guess I'll have to say they must believe he's dead, given that Xavier's in jail partly because of his fibbing about wishing Rowan did kill Wednesday, the stupid motherfucker that he is. So the gang need a plan to escort all the students out, but not in such a way to alert Thornhill or Tyler to their awareness of it. Because I guess what Enid said about having a whole bevy of beasts just won't cut it for Crackstone, but like I said, we'll get into what Crackstone is capable of in this form. Bianca suggests, albeit reluctantly, using the Siren song to hypnotize the students into safety, while Enid and Thing look for Wednesday, and I guess Ajax will continue to gaze at himself. But not too long, or else Enid will think he reneged on their relationship. So, crack at Backstone's crypt, Wednesday is not feeling so good, Mr. Stark, as she's bleeding out from her wound. So, who the fuck else to save her but Goody Addams, who tells her that necklace Morticia gave Wednesday, lucky Wednesday didn't throw it out on account of, you know, hating her back in episode 1, can heal her, but at the cost of losing Goody and those visions. Wow! What a neatly contrived bow to excuse these visions not being problematic in future, huh? But even more absurd than that is that Goody tells Wednesday that in order to kill Crackstone for good, that she needs to stab him in his black heart. Jeez! I wonder why Goody didn't try doing that when she had the opportunity beforehand, yet decided to trap his soul in a way that can be reopened for certainly stupid reasons like what just happened prior. It's like there's two brain cells between Goody and Wednesday, and they're both vying for third place. And seeing as this will be the last of Goody Addams, can I just say how I hate how these visions were incorporated into the story? Didn't make my sentiments clear in how they were only going to be used as a narrative scapegoat whenever the writers couldn't be damned to write Wednesday smart in a way that wasn't prescriptive. They've oscillated between showing random visions of the past, of the future, and not even that at times, and only working half the time with the way they're described to work. Not to mention, in episode 5, Morticia says these visions are passed through their bloodline, but Morticia herself wasn't born a fucking Addams. So, am I to believe the moment she married and took Gomez's last name, that she suddenly got a bevy of visions, and these visions themselves receded from a near-death experience like Wednesday here at some point for them to not be relevant to her anymore? It's like the writers want me to believe that Morticia was an Addams day one, yet make it explicitly clear what her last name was before meeting Gomez, and making it a point that his side of the family were the ancestors that settled in America. So, inadvertently, they've implied that Morticia and Gomez were likely distant cousins that had an incestuous relationship for any of what Morticia described in the Powers to Wednesday to make any sense for her to experience. And as for Goody herself, it's great how only now does she bring up these details in Wednesday when prior she was being purposefully cryptic for the sake of the audience to keep asking questions, assuming that Goody intended for this not to happen in the first place. There's a difference between wanting to seek easy answers and literally just give me a straight answer as to why you want me to seek out this mansion or what being the key fucking means. There's nothing in this show to suggest that Goody was limited to afford any of this info. It's like she was just being a tease to Wednesday in spite of how dire the situation is for Goody to warn her any of this in the first place. So the healing proceeds and Wednesday recovers from all her current wounds, hand and all. It would be funny if Season 2 somehow retcons Goody to return in some contrived manner regardless of establishing that Wednesday already used her Ankh of Reincarnation so she can try to kill Kel Thuzad before he reaches Anderhall. Poor analogy to what's going on? Sure, but you get the reference. Returning to Galpin's squad car, he parks at a random spot to leave Xavier to his own devices in the back. What's interesting about this is he pulls up his phone, and not only do we see the specific location of where he parked at, but also that he presumably had a tracker on Tyler. And for all I know, he's likely had this since the beginning of the show. But there's one more scene with Galpin that'll get me to wonder whether he knew all along or not. What's odd is that Galpin said that he was going to Nevermore on the double, but according to the map, he missed his spot. So was he lying, or is this his way of saving Nevermore? Because I'm not sure why he would leave Xavier in this predicament, especially if this GPS signal further puts doubt on Xavier being the monster himself, and we'll also have an opportunity to pinpoint the logistical confusion of other characters further by way of this signal. Meanwhile, Bianca and her gang are all routing out the students and subdues the only other teacher we've seen in this show as well to follow along. I guess with Thornhill being Laurel and Weems being dead, I guess he's the fucking principal of this school now. And while that's happening, Enid runs aimlessly to seek out Wednesday, but not before that narrative Chekhov's gun finally cashes its check and she proceeds to wolf out. How lucky that panned out for Enid to do this to potentially save Wednesday from dying, huh? Furthermore, the little detail that Crackstone Crypt is on a island is forgotten again, as how Wednesday or Enid would reach one another baffles me if I'm also to assume that Tyler was out watching the boat to either ferry Crackstone and Laurel along or ensure no one else would escape or reach Wednesday. Speaking of, Wednesday also runs along before getting confronted by Tyler, surprised that she's still alive. In spite of knowing that she is laughably outmatched, Wednesday says this, like as though her visions also give her the innate ability to read the script ahead of time now too. Of course, he'll make do with her by transforming into the monster, properly showing us a method of which he does so. So again, how did Tyler exactly injure himself back in the Gates mansion without tearing all of his clothes asunder? Ah, forget it. It's a moot point by this pigeon shit excuse of a show. So Tyler does the typical bad guy thing by grappling Wednesday into a tree and going for the most drawn out swipe before getting bodied by Enid, transformed as a werewolf, in which the two duke it out so that Wednesday could go back to the school to stop Crackstone's wrath. Lucky that him throwing her aggressively against that stump didn't break any bones, notably her spine for one, if I'm to believe Tyler isn't pulling any punches this time. And again, how did Enid get across into the island, and how will Wednesday get off said island? It's up to the reader's imagination to think of a better written show at this point. So Crackstone and Laurel crash in at the quad with all the students running into panic, because I guess all of them forgot that they have a means to defend themselves, even if some of them may be naturally cowardly. It'd be like if just Voldemort came storming into Hogwarts and none of the students who know how to use magic tried to defend themselves from him. Because let's see what Crackstone is capable of. He seems to have limited telepathy, even more limited in Rowan's, and does this neat parlor trick where he engulfs the quad's fountain and a good portion of the courtyard into a bevy of flame. Now, that would be dangerous, but this is the only time that Crackstone does it, and he apparently can't do it again. So yeah, where are all the fucking werewolves that could tear this little undead flesh bag limb from limb, or even the Gorgons who could attempt stoning him, or even the Sirens who could try to hypnotize him to kill himself? It's not even that I'm suggesting that does work, but at least make an attempt to show how powerful Crackstone is, because right now, I'm not convinced. Especially when Laurel's plan to destroy Nevermore hinges on reviving Crackstone as opposed to any other easier way. But we're almost to that point. Whiplashing back to the squad car, Thing inexplicably finds Xavier trapped in the back seat. How and why does Thing know that Xavier was stuck here, considering that he was with Enid heading to Crackstone Crypt, which is effectively northeast from Nevermore as opposed to where Gulpin parked his squad car at? Again, who cares? We're just happy to see Xavier will be freed. As for Gulpin, he's still searching for a signal of Tyler but loses it, only hearing the distant roars of Tyler's fight with Enid in the process. Tyler nearly gets a kill shot on Enid in said fight before getting shot by Gulpin, who says this.
Tyler, son, is that really you?
Before we can discuss Gulpin's knowledge about Tyler as a Hyde, knowing that Enid and Tyler are fighting in close proximity to Gulpin, who parked opposite of where Crackstone Crypt was relative to Nevermore, did Wednesday and Enid literally run circles around Nevermore to find one another? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me given it seemed that both of them were running aimlessly around. And so with that, let's inquire. Did Sheriff Gulpin know all along that Tyler was a monster? You might think him having a tracker on Tyler would be enough, but I'm going to assume that he was merely tracking Tyler's phone using his own and didn't legitimately have some kind of implanted chip on him. However, knowing that Gulpin does have one does lead me to speculate that Gulpin had suspicions about Tyler's actions up to this point. The problem is, if Gulpin did know all along that Tyler was a monster, wouldn't he, I don't know, try to console him on it, confront him as a father before being a police officer? I don't think Gulpin would be fine with his son being a serial killer if he knew that he was the monster, and only in this episode does Wednesday even lampshade the possibility that he covered up for his son. Furthermore, with what Gulpin says to Wednesday about the DNA evidence being inconclusive, if Gulpin did know that Fang belonged to Tyler, wouldn't he have tried to make regarding who the bloody rag belonged to? Conversely, with as doggone Gulpin was to frame Nevermore for these killings, you could reason he was doing that to cover for his son. But assuming he did know, I feel the veil of protecting his son would have ended after the third or fourth kill and would have confronted him justly had he known. So with that, I can only assume that Gulpin truly didn't know for certain that Tyler was the monster, but must have known that Tyler likely had the capability of committing these acts, especially when Gulpin delivers the line like this as though he can't fathom his own son being responsible. It's just such a shame that Gulpin and Tyler get barely any time to interact with them to make the subtext of why Tyler commits to these acts in the first place, as well as weave some duplicity into Gulpin that was literally only sprinkled in this episode alone. The two monsters effectively knock the wind out of each other while Gotham tries to comfort his bloodied son, a mix of disappointment and worry from this revelation. Too bad this show can't stay on any scene for too long, we got more action to show. And with that, effectively ends Tyler as a antagonist for this show, and what wasted potential he was. I will say that on first viewing I was quite impressed with how Tyler had seduced Wednesday into sticking around, but now knowing the full context of how these scenes came together makes it as though Tyler suddenly became evil only in the last episode. And as for weaving any intrigue as to why Tyler commits these violent acts by his own words rather than being assumed by Wednesday, we'll likely never know why Tyler was fine with doing this or whether his actions were of his own doing and not by the whims of Laurel. Was he upset about how his mother was treated by normies when she became a Hyde and Laurel used that anger to direct it towards her goals of creating Crackstone? Or did Tyler truly hate outcasts, as Xavier alluded to in episode 4, because of his own hatred of discovering that he was one? We won't know, and I don't take it by Wednesday's word for it, given how utterly wrong she's been on every other psychoanalysis of a given character. The students run out of the school while Wednesday runs in it to grab a sword, presumably the same one that Gomez used to kill Garrett. I get they want to have poetic irony with how the next scene will play out, but shouldn't this sword been rid of or perpetually stuck in an evidence locker considering the cover-up of said murder? Shit, I didn't even mention how the investigation into whether Anwar truly Jeffrey Epstein himself never is concluded, or that Laurel was lucky that Wednesday inadvertently helped her to kill Anwar and frame it as suicide because of that fucking bubblegum too? Or how Laurel somehow knew Anwar is in town to kill him in order to disrupt Wednesday's investigation, being able to forge a letter perfectly in his handwriting to make the suicide convincing, and that in spite of Laurel's attempt to disrupt said investigation had only gotten Wednesday, and by extension, Mayor Walker, closer to figuring out who she really is because of the frankly contrived means of which Gomez took the blame for the killing of Garrett, on top of Wednesday's visions claiming that the sword didn't kill Garrett. Yep, that entire bit is never addressed and is just a loose end forever left to the wayside of episode 5. So, no surprise that this sword is still here years later. So, some dipshit students run toward the fire. Good advice there, Ava. And towards Crackstone before Wednesday makes her presence known to him, as opposed to trying to stab him when he least expects it. She's prepared to fight, but not before Xavier has to come in to simp harder for her by trying to shoot an arrow at Crackstone. With his telepathy, he redirects it back at him, and Wednesday blocks it by taking it to the shoulder. She's surprisingly fine by this, and has Xavier go save some more students who can't locate their head from their ass, so she can go mano-a-mano with a dude she just saw telepath projectiles at her. Not sure how Wednesday expects to win this, but you'll see. So the choreography gets to flex one more time before the sword shatters against the staff. I mean, I'm assuming it was a sword just for display, and Crackstone has his one up, until Bianca makes the smart call and stabs him in the back when he least expects it. He throws her aside in a fury as she hit the wrong spot, giving Wednesday an opportunity to show Bianca how to exorcise the demon. And yeah, Crackstone is defeated like that, by a fucking shard of what is effectively a Maul katana, and I'm supposed to believe that he was such a threat that none of the students who have supernatural powers, unlike Wednesday, and no, psychic visions don't count, could have done anything to stop him. Even if they couldn't kill him because they don't know specifically how, I'm sure if you turn him into the Black Knight from Monty Python, I'm sure he's about as useless as being dead. So, with him gone, it means that Laurel/Thornhill's plan is effectively ruined. So yeah, she had to do this frankly convoluted setup where she had to pretend to be someone else, get herself inducted into Nevermore as a teacher, groom a Hyde into collecting body parts for her, and arbitrate another student to stick around, all in service to summon someone who has limited pyrotechnics, telepathy, and can be upended with a butter knife if thrust with enough effort. So, now I ask, why didn't Laurel use any other method, like the nightshade poison she clearly was making back at the greenhouse? She quite literally could have killed every student at Nevermore by Jonestowning the punch like Garrett was supposed to 30 years ago with the same poison without raising any suspicions at the Raven Dance. I know she said she wanted to go for a more supernatural approach, but Ansel Gates' plan wasn't stupid because it wasn't supernatural, but that it was just that his son was too stupid to follow through on that plan. And I don't buy that she couldn't have made it enough, as she clearly had a decent vat of it while already establishing her using it on Weems earlier to get her out of the picture. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, she couldn't have made that vat of poison. She knows a good deal about plants, does she not? So you mean to tell me she couldn't have given every student some poisonous plant and tried to sell it off as not poisonous either? I mean, maybe not to Wednesday, since Wednesday already knows whatever the plot insists she must, but Laurel could just as easily kill her with a gun as she's vying to do here. And if subtlety isn't her strong suit, why did she need Crackstone specifically as opposed to going at Nevermore school shooter style? Or better yet, Laurel, did you forget that you could have used Tyler as your murder machine towards Nevermore, given that his kill count is 8 at this point, as opposed to Crackstone's 1 with Wednesday, technically speaking, if I am to believe he has a grudge against them or hatred of himself as an outcast? Is it just because had she not would have made Rowan's prophecy a red herring, or that this show trying to inject the theme of the conflict between outcasts and normies too on the nose for them to regard how effective reviving Crackstone would be in the long run? I mean, the fact that Laurel is going for handling things personally means that all of this was merely a symbolic gesture, and she hadn't a fucking clue whether it would actually work, in spite of having planned this out for likely decades to seek revenge on those who wronged her. So Laurel comes in with Luger in hand, ready to kill Wednesday, as she's certain she won't be able to kill all the outcasts. What's stopping her from pulling the trigger now? A single fucking bee. That's what. Yeah. Laurel isn't just holding the idiot ball for this episode, she's practically dribbling it at this point. On top of the hilarity that one bee becomes many, and Laurel tries to shoot at the swarm approaching her, because yeah, that'll totally stop them biting you. It turns out that Eugene was controlling them, as only now do we find out that he has that ability, giving Wednesday the chance to give Laurel her just desserts. And that was the end of Laurel Gates, a character who was apparently real clever until the show decided she wasn't, and drapes a proverbial crevice across what little foundation is left from this despondent show. So, what else is there? Ajax comforts a naked and bloodied Enid, whom only has Wednesday currently on her mind. I guess as one payoff, considering how Wednesday feels about hugging, Wednesday herself embraces Enid in a hug as opposed to her. And as much as I want to like this, they've not had nearly enough chemistry, nor Enid enough of a character to convince me they've earned this moment. Is this show fucking over with? I think I need a cold shower after having to trudge through this nonsense. We get what is effectively a time skip, as it's the dead of winter, as Lurtz is helping pack up all of Wednesday's stuff. As another payoff, Wednesday finishes up her novel, as was alluded throughout this show, even if said novel was only a allegory for everything else that was happening to her. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, like I still am, how this school can function when 2/3 of the student faculty are dead? Apparently it doesn't, as the school will be closed for the semester, but I don't know if it's because of the winter break or because of the lack of faculty. Neither Wednesday or Enid elaborate. They both reminisce on the loss of Weems, as though Weems ever truly got a chance to have a character beyond her wanting to preserve the integrity of Nevermore by any means necessary. And it's odd how there was a whole funeral concession for the mayor but not for Weems, if I'm made to believe that Nevermore had a lot of institutional power over Jericho as a town. Regardless, Weems is yet another of many characters throughout this show that either had one defining characteristic, or two, and the other is quickly dashed away as soon as it's addressed, like with her supposed jealousy about Morticia as one. We get one more scene with Xavier and Wednesday, where Xavier bafflingly regrets the things he said in jail, even in spite of all the charges dismissed on him. And, if the Cypri couldn't be even greater, he literally gifts her a phone. Geez, Addams might have some competition for once. As for Xavier, since this is the chance for me to talk about the characters at the end of this travel, Xavier is exceedingly frustrating as one because I want so badly to root for him, but not only does the show make him out to be the bad guy, but he himself doesn't help his case with not only how much he puts up with the emotional abuse Wednesday coats over him, but how quickly he'll get over her blatantly fucking with him. and I'm seriously supposed to believe that he wants to tongue punch Wednesday's cooch simply because she inadvertently saved him from dying when he was younger? I get that he would be grateful, maybe even more patient with her attitude than most from that, but hardly on the cusp of romance, much less simpering romance, would I expect one to reciprocate that gratitude in turn. So, with Wednesday Addams leaving while Nevermore likely gets liquidated on account of the lack of faculty, multiple examples of neglect to the student's safety, and the literal dead bodies present at Nevermore, this should be over, right? I wish it was, but this show never exceeds to piss me off by trying to imply a second season teaser by way of some anonymous contact who texts Wednesday on her brand new phone about how they're watching her, on top of her passing by the APC with Tyler in the back trying to Hulk out of it. Oh geez, who could it possibly be, given that the only person who could even know of Wednesday's number is the guy who gave it to her? Man, it just boggles the mind, it does! And yeah, wonder why Xavier wasn't in that APC earlier if Gulpin and the sheriffs all believed he was the monster, but considering that this is literally the end of this show, it's just one more twist of the knife. And now, that closes the book on the Wednesday show, episode for episode. I still have some of my trademark analysis to do about the show as a whole, the themes, and where I will go next with my projects. So, how to describe a show like this? Well, it hardly earns the reputation of anything it's trying to be, whether that's trying to be a dark, twisted murder mystery, or a dark comedy high school drama, or a Addams Family adjacent show. Even with that, this show hardly bears the distinction of being good on its own merits, something that doesn't elude casual audiences in spite of how much of a powerhouse it was for viewing. It bungles on almost every facet if you don't pay attention to the finer details, literally events, places, people, and situations to be quickly discarded in latter episodes. The characters that are present barely have the distinction of going through any arc, much less have one worth engaging with, all propelled by a main character that couldn't be more insufferable to root for or respect given how they've written her. Wednesday is a self-righteous, overtly presumptuous, holier-than-thou cunt who, in spite of how rude, demeaning, or up her own ass she is, has a gaggle of people who gravitate to her every verbiage, never getting the licks she deserved for her attitude throughout this show. Now, I should clarify, because apparently people think if you hate a character, you must hate the actor too. I actually like Jenna Ortega's performance as Wednesday, even with as passionate as I've been about hating said character. Because ultimately the issues with the character are down to the writers, something Miss Ortega likely had no onus on. But I've also heard from the grapevine that she had a lot of input in said character, so for all I know, the version of Wednesday we ultimately got was likely better than the one we could have gotten had she not stepped in. And it's very odd that actors even have to do this in the first place because the writers are more preoccupied shoving the pen down their nose than on the pages. But that is also assuming the writers had it in their heart to even write this show with the Addams family in mind. I mentioned back in part 1 that I've watched several reviews tackling this show, and a lot of my basal criticisms about said show were derived from the Judgmental Critters video discussing the show, especially with the theory that this show was made with the intention of competing with HBO Max's Monster High special that came out just a month prior to when this show did. Details like how Wednesday was originally supposed to be a vampire vindicate why the vampires depicted in this show might as well not have been, and more importantly how Wednesday is early shoehorned into the central plot by way of Rowan. And seeing as I've not delved into every last facet about that contrivance, let's. So, if Rowan needed to deliver Wednesday the plot by this drawn out murder exposition, you would think he had mentioned Crackstone in the illustration at any point, do you not? Or bring the illustration in full to contextualize why he believes Wednesday would destroy the school? But even looking at the illustration in full, how do you suppose Wednesday would when she's standing opposite of Crackstone as opposed to next to him, hand in hand? Maybe something in the book was written to elucidate that detail, but alas, the book is completely irrelevant from the moment Wednesday acquires it and the other half of the illustration. That book might as well have that illustration with all the pages blank for how useful it was to the whole of the plot. So why even make it a point for Rowan to have stolen it? Or better yet, you mean to tell me Rowan stole the book, ripped out half the illustration, got confronted by Xavier in their room with said book, and politely put it back just before planning to confront Wednesday about this when the opportunity finds itself? And let me remind you, he only managed to find an opportunity because of Wednesday bumping into him with visions he couldn't have possibly accounted for when she was running away from the Pilgrim bullies. So, for all I know, he was just keeping that part of the illustration as a reminder to him, as though he fucking needed one. That is how utterly borked the circumstances are in involving Wednesday into the show proper, getting me to speculate that what the judgmental critter said about this being stapled with the Addams family sheen post-haste to be true. But there are a variety of other examples as to how Wednesday is only Wednesday in name alone by way of the themes. To start off, the most prominent one is the conflict, prejudice, and misgivings that the outcasts and normies share with one another. Now, if I'm to take it on Enid's account that the difference between being a outcast as opposed to a normie is simply that normies are people without supernatural qualities compared to outcasts. The problem with that, of course, is that this show wants to have it both ways. Make this theme a allegory about racism and bigotry, yet simultaneously acknowledge a lot of the superstitious worry about outcasts as a whole regarding their supernatural powers. Let's look at the candidates for exploring this theme, starting with Joseph Crackstone. Despite how thinly veiled Crackstone's own hatred for outcasts are, given the time period and circumstances involving the Salem witch trials, it would actually make sense that what Crackstone perceives of Goody's powers to be from a demonic source, so there really isn't any qualms there. As for whether it's compelling in exploring this dynamic is another thing entirely, as it's simply delivered like the paranoid hysteric we see in Crackstone. The second person that explores this dynamic is Lucas. His disposition towards outcasts as a whole seems contrived at first to establish Wednesday as a girl boss when she kicks his and the other bullies' ass at the Weather Vane. Only until episode 6 do we establish that his hatred towards them was founded on his own inadequacies as a person of any worth, and was projecting that onto the other outcasts in turn. Of course, this gets squandered by the polite veneer he puts on with Enid to go to the dance with her in episode 4 to try to ruin their dance, only to then have a sudden change of heart when he finds familiarity with Enid, as though the concept of outcasts sharing similar interests with normies a completely alien one. It's also odd too how his reaction to the death of his own father didn't further fuel his own ire towards outcasts, if he was willing to blame them for embarrassing him by way of the ruination of the Crackstone statue coronation, or at least put him at odds with the friendship he briefly established with Bianca. It could have been an opportunity to set Lucas as this constantly conflicted person who needs to punch down others to make himself feel better, yet still has a conscience to know what he's doing is wrong, when the scenes do little to explore that part of him, ultimately making his dynamic exploring that theme a C-plot shoved far back in the closet. The third and most damaging example of exploring this dynamic is none other than the titular antagonist herself, Thornhill/Laurel. We are first given to believe that her hatred of outcasts is completely hereditary by her family, who also hated outcasts for no discernible reason. Yet, when Thornhill had gone and killed Dr. Anwar, a suicide note she wrote for him seemed to imply she had more of a hatred for those who had covered up the truth about her late brother's fate, that being Principal Weems and Mayor Walker. This glance that she shows in this scene is excellent subtext of her realizing that the two people whom let the Addams walk to boost their own respective careers are still profiting off their success years later. And yet, from what Wednesday surmises about Laurel, she still has it out for the Addams, who, in spite of having killed Garrett in self-defense, had no culpability in covering up those circumstances and only just assumed that they were innocent of any wrongdoing legitimately. Is it just because that what Laurel probably understood when she was young was that the powers that be had it out against normies for the sanctity of outcasts? Because if I'm going to be pedantic about what defines an outcast, none of the Addams who have gone to Nevermore are considered as such. They are quirky, weird, and macabre, but none of them present any supernatural powers beyond psychic visions, of which even Gomez doesn't even have the luxury of even that as a technicality. More importantly, Laurel likely also knew that Garrett had an obsession with an outcast himself, which set in motion his fate to be had he had just gone along with his father's wishes. So, shouldn't that also be running interference with Laurel's cold instinct to kill all outcasts? Or even that her going out killing normies to fulfill her greater plan in motion, and that part of her revenge for those who wronged her involved a normie and Mara Walker caused further conflict with her own blind bigotry of outcasts? Like I said, this show is trying to have it both ways, but also trying to square the circle of the Addams' involvement in any of this, in spite of them not even being outcasts in the loosest definition, nor having taken part in the self-destruction of Laurel's own family. So, what this amounts to is that Laurel's own convoluted revenge plot to resurrect a level 1 skeleton mage to kill the outcasts came from her brother's own obsession with a non-outcast outcast dying and having been covered up by a normie sheriff and a normie coroner. Do you see now how nonsensical her own motivations are when we break this all down? Even more so regarding the method in which she enacts her revenge plots would require her to make the person she adores a outcast by Craxton's own admission, if reviving the dead would be witchcraft in his own eyes. So all in all, this theme doesn't really work for this show, even for the parties in question. What other themes are present in this? The only other one I could glean was of Wednesday's own regarding her trust issues about certain people, although this could also be just another arc of hers. This is quickly established with her own estrangement towards her parents, although as I presented chiefly in part 1 and part 3, this also gets quickly dashed away as a conflict we can meaningfully explore, as though Wednesday's own hatred of her parents was thinly veiled from the start. Secondly is her distrust towards Xavier, which also seems to come out of left field, largely this line she says to him at Arrow practice as an example. She knows little about Xavier's upbringing up to this point, and whatever legend status his father is to this show is of little circumstance regarding her disposition towards him. And it's clearly apparent that this was done to fast track her suspicions towards him when he would show up in such timely moments to incriminate himself. Thirdly is the inconsistent nature in which she lets in on Principal Weems regarding her investigation compared to Sheriff Galpin. I fear that with making it so Galpin has a chip on his shoulder regarding the Addams, that he and Wednesday would be opposed to each other in spite of seeking the same goal. Yet Wednesday goes to bat for Galpin at every turn and even uses his disdain for Nevermore as a bargaining chip. I'm given to believe that Wednesday had no patience for Principal Weems because she exemplifies the idea of what Nevermore presents as an obstacle to Wednesday, but this is only lampshaded in episode 1 as going forward, Wednesday is keen on figuring out how she's fundamental in its destruction. In episode 2, Wednesday literally makes it a point that she wants to talk to Galpin alone, that she believes someone is covering up Rowan's murder to Principal Weems. Meaning, she must assume that Weems had some part in it, yet not once considering the guy who was out looking for said body couldn't have also had a hand in it. And this is even before Wednesday even figures out that Weems is a shapeshifter, and that she and Mara Walker had made an arrangement covering up the Gates' incident in episode 5. So, like with her distrust of Xavier, this was all in service to fast-track a frankly dysfunctional aspect about herself. And what exactly do we learn from these themes, or the characters for that matter? Beyond the obvious of not distrusting people blindly or judging people by preconceived notions, none of the characters in this show, alive or dead, really learn anything, especially Wednesday. She doesn't have any second doubts or regrets about those she wrongly accused, feelings of guilt regarding how she treated those who saw her as a friend in spite of it all. Any qualms she did have at the beginning of the show, namely her feelings about Nevermore and her parents, are dropped like that. So, principally, Wednesday is no different from episode 1 to episode 8. And I think the fact that Nevermore 2 Wednesday Beyond the Aesthetic has a social dynamic no different from the one we get a vertical slice of in episode 1 is indicative of how Wednesday as a show fails in whatever it's trying to be. So, now you ask, how would I have made this show if given the basic premise? Well, I think first and foremost, I would make it so that Wednesday would have to struggle with the fact that in spite of being a shut-in in most other schools, she would be in Bianca's position as the Queen Bee in Nevermore. That the very kind of off-putting nature she exudes is a turn-on in a place like Nevermore, and that Wednesday would unironically have to act like Enid to get the kind of light she would prefer. Sort of a goth version of Mean Girls, if you will. And instead of Bianca as a rival to Wednesday, have Enid be one, as someone jealous of the attention Wednesday gets, in spite of Wednesday not actually wanting it, trying to reluctantly suggest the advice of Enid to put herself off the popularity spectrum. You could even have it that in their bickering, Enid realizes that she doesn't want what Wednesday has from seeing how superficial that kind of position is, similarly to the conceits Bianca shared at the school dance. Beyond that, I would make Nevermore function like a proper school rather than just have it be as dysfunctional as it is, although as to how it would juggle the supernatural powers of its students, such that someone like Bianca couldn't hypnotize the teachers to her whims, would still be problematic. Furthermore, if wanting to fixate on Wednesday was such a necessary feature of this Addams Family adjacent, then I would still have it where we focus on Wednesday vicariously engaging with each of the entities of the Addams Family in whole, rather than making it so they are largely absent sans Wednesday and Thing. Maybe that could be what happens with this metaphorical season 2, but had it my way, I would have made season 1 just that. A day-to-day of Wednesday's life with the other Addams notable throughout. As for the murder mystery, it would need a complete redress, but in trying to keep certain elements, have it where Laurel gets the idea to resurrect Crackstone from his father trying to resurrect his son, as having the former makes Goody suddenly the stupidest person in this entire show, as it compounds everything else that happens in this show, whereas the latter would at least be thematically relevant to her own motivations. And if reviving Crackstone is as fundamental to her plan as she claims, then make Crackstone an intimidating entity rather than seeming a footnote for episode 3 and 8 chiefly, and being killed off as pathetically as he does. I would also try to have more dialogue between Gulpin and Tyler to establish Tyler's own reasons for going through with Laurel's plan, as well as Gulpin's own internal fight with being a father over being an officer of the law. Lastly, it wouldn't be a discussion about a show's quality if we didn't discuss the meta around this show, as I've made my sentiments already clear about the heavy-handedness of some of Wednesday's dialogue. There's some other lines sprinkled throughout that raise an eyebrow, but beyond that, does this show gain the woke seal of approval? You could reason that the choice to make what seems like a rural Northeast American town racially diverse as indicative of that, especially if we get pedantic about the racial demographics of Vermont, as Jericho is based on the town of the same name. But technically, any choice to make any character a given race is arbitrary, as I can just as easily make an argument that Tyler should be black that I could Eugene being white. But the racial makeup of these characters is hardly a factor in this show, despite wanting to nail that outcast versus normie allegory for racism home, which I'm not sure is a failure of the writing or the soft edginess of having that commentary while simultaneously not putting attention on the race of who is being the bigot in a given situation. I do also find it ironic how the moment Tim Burton stops being the directing hand for this show, the heavy-handedness of its writing softens greatly, as most of everything I outlined is in episode 1 to episode 4. Was it something he only did by committee as it's Le Current Year and the other directors who aren't much better in the writing department were more committed to dialogue relevant to that character to say? Who knows? All I know is that this show will only be remembered for by TikTok shorts and this singular image, which couldn't tie a greater bow on how what it couched its identity on is displaced but what it ultimately became. A show everyone watched, yet no one cares for. And that was it, folks. I was quite surprised by myself the output of this series compared to how long it took me to finish the Wonderlands analysis, as I had gotten this project started in early October and roughly finished 5 hours of video in a matter of just a few months. Of course, I was putting most of my focus on this as I wanted all 4 parts out by the end of this year, so some of my other projects and hobbies I get myself up to were put aside for this. As I conclude with my Wonderlands analysis, yes, I still have plans to cover the story of Tales from the Borderlands. That hasn't changed. Although when I will start on that project has yet to be seen, as I don't want to start another big project right after having gotten this one off in such an expedient amount of time. I still also have ideas as to how I want to tackle this story springing to mind, but I need to have these on paper before I can put them to practice. So maybe for the time being, I'll get back to working on some smaller videos for a change, as 2023 was definitely the most productive year for my YouTube channel to date. For posterity's sake, even though this is still part 4 of me already having done this, all citations are available for each part in the pinned comment of each respective part's comment section. And I always make sure to put in the citations for redundant sources I already use in the prior parts. Of course, if you happen to find only this part by mistake and don't know where to find the others, a playlist for the Wednesday show analysis in whole can be found on my channel. But if you did watch front to back part 1 to now, then I hope this was as entertaining and enlightening for you as it was for me to make it. Hope to see you next year for more to come.